understanding and self-esteem. Okay?
That's something.
Yes?
I have one question or remark. All these titles start with how.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting. So, very differently from all dissertations or ancient titles, they on something, the Latin. You're always asking questions.
That again, I think that's it is a very important question, that. Because I think everybody in this room, and again, you can question the validity now of the claim I'm going to make, because I'm making it about everybody. When you're back in your professional practice, when you're doing what you do every day, that you will be aware that you're not living some of your values as fully as you can. And it creates a bit of a tension because you want to improve things for the pupils or your students. So I'm claiming that everybody here has experienced that tension in a question, how do I improve what I'm doing? Now, you can question that now, if just check the validity of what I'm claiming. Because this claim moved me into the university as I've been teaching 6 years in the East End of London, which is a very rough area. And I found myself every day asking that question. And in fact, I've got to do this better. How do I do this better? Because I really want to do the best I possibly can for my pupils. Now, that I and the how, I insisted should be brought into research questions. And at that time I was studying philosophy of education. This was 4 years part-time study. I already had a degree in the physical sciences with a joint honours in chemistry and physics. I was a head of a science department, but I was studying for 4 years of those 6 at the University of London with philosophers of education who told me that educational theory was made up of philosophy, psychology, sociology and history of education. Okay, so that was educational theory. And more than that, they said that my practical principles, the ones that I came from teaching in my classroom with my students, and I quote, were at best pragmatic maxims that had only a crude and superficial justification in practice that would be replaced in any rational theory with principles from the disciplines of education. Now, I began to get offended by that. That my practical principles, the values of love, justice, the passion I had for freedom, would be replaced by the principles from the philosophy, psychology, sociology, and history of education. Am I making sense here? That is still, as I go around the world, quite a dominating view of academics in universities. So I went to the University of Bath in 1973 to see if I could actually transform that view of educational theory. From that question, how do I improve my practice? So that is why you see that how can I work with the government's perspectives of gifted and talented and still remain true to my living values? Now that is actually, as you're asking about, how do you retain your own sense of integrity? Yeah? That it was Joy Mountain, who is now a head teacher of a primary school. She was resisting our government, who said that the schools, and it wasn't exactly legislative, but it came over as a demand that the schools identify 10% of their children as gifted or talented. Joy said, look, this is offensive. All my children have got talents. I want them to develop whatever talents they have in relation to the gifts that they can offer. So you'll find that in this section on gifts and talents, a lot of the teacher actually, like this is a head teacher, Louise Cripps, how can I clarify my responsibility as a head teacher as I provide opportunities to enable all children in the school to create talents? So they were resisting the government's demand of elitism to just identify, just imagine what the rest of the 90 must feel. I'm not talented or gifted. So these teachers are saying, no, the how do I improve question actually is focusing on the values that I want to retain my integrity in believing and holding, and I'll inquire into that. Have you got how important this is? Because in the universities, and it may be the same in your European countries, and this is what will be exciting for me to find out, that the I, your I, in a research question, could be removed by the academics in the university. Yeah? 91, I was being paid, my university was paid for me to be a consultant at Kingston University to promote action research. Their research committee was made up of scientists and engineers. A head teacher put forward her doctoral proposal with I in the title. How do I improve my practice as a head teacher and enhance learning opportunities for my children? She was written to by the committee to say, we want you to remove the personal pronoun I from your inquiry. Now, doesn't that seem silly? How can you remove your I from your question, how do I improve my practice? But even 2 weeks ago, a professor at the British Education Research Association in the UK was saying, do you know, I've got this problem with one of the universities where I've been helping a student to get a doctoral proposal through, and this was a teacher, and the research committee are asking for the I to be removed. Now, that was only 2 weeks ago. So I'd be very interested, if you really believe that those are the kind of questions that you're asking and you wish to research, and I've got all those examples now about doctorates and masters being awarded for educators who are willing to study their own practice as they improve matters with their children. All those examples are now there to show that it's been legitimated. But I'd be interested in your responses, you know, as you go into the universities and see, can you get your embodied knowledge as educators legitimated by the academy? Okay, so that's the how do I question. Yeah? Now,
I find very, very stimulating and very breaking the rules that we always seen at university and also at school practice. Sometimes you have to just remove the I and accept the government and procedures.
Yeah. And remember, if you've got a training or a degree in physical science, as I have, you were trained to take the I out. You know, it was claimed that it was subjective, it was anecdotal, you must not use it, it's subjective. Now, if you engage in the action research, and I'll come on now to Thomas' question about how can you get these kind of inquiries going, you can use what this philosopher of science Karl Popper talked about, where he said that objectivity is based in intersubjective criticism. Now, I made this point 2 days ago in the lecture that I gave, that if you can see that the power of your critical abilities in this room is enormous. If somebody comes with an account for you to have a look at, you could very easily help them to strengthen the evidence base, the relationship to the values they claim to be living, through the exercise of your critical faculties. Now that, according to Popper, is how we strengthen the objectivity of our accounts, but recognizing that they're grounded in intersubjective criticism. So subjectivity is actually impossible to get away from. You shouldn't try, you should acknowledge that this is coming from a subjective ground. We're strengthening the objectivity through what he called the mutual rational control of critical discussion. And you can do this with me. After this, you can write to me and say, Jack, here is what I think you might do to strengthen your research, and I could then take on your critical evaluation and see what I could make of it to help me to improve my work. Now, that question about how might you do this kind of work, which is rigorous, and it actually goes back to the work of John Dewey, because John Dewey's logic had this kind of inquiry process in it, that all of you have got concerns, because your values are not being lived as fully as you want. Now, outside your conscious control, your imaginations will already be working as soon as you have attention that you're not living your values as fully as you want to. Your imaginations start to think of possibilities that you can act on to improve matters. And I'll guarantee that everybody here recognises that they've acted to try to improve matters. You've tried to evaluate how effective you've been, and then you modify what you do in the light of your evaluations. Now, let me just check, because that's a second claim that I'm making of you, as well as having values that you feel are right at the heart of you trying to improve things, you've already going through systematic forms of inquiry, literally as action researchers. That you've all said, look, I've got a concern. I really am concerned here. It's not as good as it could be. Right, I imagine what to do, I act, and I evaluate. Now, if you leave it, what we say, implicit, in other words, I am now making this explicit, as I make it explicit, it becomes research. You're making it public so others can actually exercise their critical judgment to see if your claims are valid. So you can move it from the intuitive form of inquiry, where you're going through this kind of action reflection cycle, but you can make it public and share it into action research. It's making it public that actually makes it the research, the inquiry made public. Now, Thomas questions very much, how do you do this? Now, if you go to the actionresearch.net, okay, so there's the front page of actionresearch.net. Now, all you need to do is browse down the front page, and you've got here 2 booklets. One from a colleague of mine. She was one of my first students to get a living theory thesis accepted. It's Jean McNiff. And Jean's website and booklets is really superb. I'll show you how you can access Jean's website, her publications. She's just done some superb work in Qatar, and over 12 months she's actually worked not only with men but with women to actually develop these kind of inquiries, which in Qatar was quite very new for women to be encouraged and developed in terms of these kinds of inquiries. And Jean's little booklet there about action research for professional development, concise advice, is really, as I say, well worth just clicking and accessing. Now, if you just go down that front page, I just want to show you something that it's quite a way down. It's about halfway down, and it's after the diagram of the action research process. Well, this came out of something at Liverpool Hope University last weekend, where John Walton, who got a doctorate in this way, is now directing the Centre for the Child and Family. And what Joan gave the rest of the Ed.D. students, because Joan is a tutor at Liverpool Hope, and they had a new group, new Ed.D., 16 students last weekend, and Joan put her action research project onto the table with the students, so she can be seen, like Trygva was actually showing the film, which was actually working with the guitar makers and players, not on them, and it wasn't the external researcher doing research on, it was definitely collaborative and with. And this is what Joan has done here. Now, this is a project aiming high for disabled children. Now, what Joan has done is she's answered this research action planning question. And this answers, partially I hope, Thomas' point about how can you get this inquiry going. Well, if you were to do this, you will be starting with, as Joan has, what matters to Joan. Eh? And what matters to Joan is helping the most vulnerable children in society. That is what she wants to do. As a young woman, she worked in care homes and felt inadequate of working with children in care because she didn't feel she had the knowledge to respond appropriately to these vulnerable children. 30 years later, she's now back in the university trying to still work at how to support and enhance the quality of life of the vulnerable children. And she's now got a very big project in the Liverpool area working with, I think it's over 18 people who've all got responsibility for helping the vulnerable children and to look at the nature of their influence. So you can get this on the web, so this is accessible for you. You can just print it off and use it. You can use and print off any of these resources. They're all freely available from the educators that I work with. But this one here, look, what really matters to me? What do I care passionately about? I'm not sure